Hello, and welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Scint,
I'm Axion.
and we are continuing our playthrough of Final Fantasy V and our discussion of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer/Philosopher's Stone. So, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about the concept of a magic school in general.
And what is this shimmying thing?
This is Garula, who is the boss, I believe.
Ah, that makes sense. It looks like Snuffleupagus had a really, really rough night. Oh, he turned around. Okay. But yes, magic schools, and honestly school settings in general for fiction, because there are quite a few books that rely on this. Probably because, write what you know, and most people have been to school. So it makes sense that we would fall into this sort of setting as being rather common.
And it's an extremely common concept. I mean,
Go ahead.
like Dungeons and Dragons has had like magic schools forever. And
Yes, but I think they mean it in a slightly different sense.
right, yeah, I was gonna get to that. This is meaning something more in the concept of a magical school rather than a school that happens to teach magic.
Like, I think it's better to describe, like, D&D magic schools as, like, majors rather than schools. Because we're talking about, like, a place you go to be taught magic. Whereas in Dungeons & Dragons, oh yeah, this is from the Evocation School of Magic, just means it's
Well, yeah, that's what I
something-
was meaning. Like, places where wizards learn magic.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying the wording because yours was mildly confusing. So,
Yeah.
insert Order of the Spell level comic here.
But yeah, this is more in the concept of a school that is magical rather than a school that teaches magic. And there's, as I said, been all kinds of stories in that kind of vein. The one that jumps immediately to mind for me is one that isn't actually magical in the Harry Potter kind of magic sense, that everything is mystical and there's fairies and elves and wizards and all that fun stuff. It's Wayside School. Or
I
Magic
could definitely
School
see
Bus.
that. I don't know. I'm pretty sure Miss Frizzle might actually be doing some sort of magic in there.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
she probably
Yeah.
is, yes.
Yeah, I could definitely see making the case for those. But yeah, in the sense of the Harry Potter world, I'm thinking of things that might be more familiar to people who've read, like Tamara Pierce's Circle of Magic, or some of Diana Wynne Jones's work. Though in some of hers, magic is just taught like in regular school curriculum. Like in her Crestomancy books, for example, there's just like, okay, we finished our history, now let's practice our basic spells sort of conversation happening. But she does have other works that look a little bit more into it, like Year of the Griffin, Darkwood of Durkalma. Magic schools are mentioned explicitly as in places you go to learn magic.
Right.
One that might come to mind for you that I'm surprised you didn't mention was Unseen University in Ankh-Morpork.
I would have gotten to it eventually.
But yeah, that's another place that gets referenced fairly frequently if these are going to be brought up, and I'm honestly trying to wonder how Ridcully would handle being at Hogwarts. I'm not sure which group would be worse off, him or the school.
I honestly could not tell you.
I'm pretty sure the Bursar would last about 5 minutes with the Weasley twins, though.
Oh, that would be definite.
I need to see this. Can we please request fan art of the Weasley twins and the Bursar of Ankh-Morpork's Unseen University, please?
I would be very surprised if something like that doesn't exist already.
Oh, don't tempt me to Google it. I have to focus on what we're talking about, which is magic schools, and I've already gotten sidetracked. But yeah, I kind of want to backtrack away from that a little bit, though, and talk about just the school setting. As mentioned, most people have been to school. Many more adding on to that, like if you include homeschool and GEDs and alternative education, people have had some form of peer interaction re-education. And I think that leads to everybody having at least some opinion on school, as well as everybody having impressions of, different types of student you would run into there, which makes it very, very easy for writers to tap into these memories because it's pretty accessible. We all knew people who played sports, even if we didn't play them ourselves. We also knew people who were in the band. We knew people who did the drama club stuff. We knew the teacher's pets. We knew etc., etc., etc. People fall into these niches, and they exist, as Harry Potter shows us, even within the confines of a magical school. So, admittedly, I'm a really boring person to talk to about my experiences in school because, as I've mentioned before, I was basically Hermione, so I never really had that big of an issue with school. I look back on it mostly neutral to positively. I never really had the negative experience that so many people seem to have, which means I don't really identify with it as well as others, but I am aware of it, and you're not getting that, Esper, are you?
Nope. I'm pretty sure that's the mime, and I have to come back for it later.
Do you really want mimes, though? I mean, you know what happens with Lord Vetinari and mimes.
Oh dear.
Learn the words!
Yeah, it taunts you with it, but you can't get it.
That sounds very much like a mime. It does seem fitting that it was basically trapped in an invisible box from you.
Oh, I didn't think of that.
That's what I'm here for. So, on a lighter note, what were your impressions of school?
So,
I retract lighter note.
so, are we getting eaten?
It's okay. It's a friendly buffet. I think Ferris speaks whale, so you'll be able to get back out.
So, my experience with school was not good. I moved schools when I was between 1st and 2nd grade, and I have a rather unfortunate real-life last name, so there was much mockery for the first, 6 or 7 years of my life after that move. I spent the first 6 or 7 years of my life in a big city and then moved to a very small rural town. I was also a video game playing nerd, as is quite obvious. And I never really had much interest in sports. I never had much interest in, a lot of social stuff that people associate with entertainment for people who live in that kind of a environment. So I did not fit in when I was a kid. And I got picked on and bullied and teased and made fun of a lot for various things. And it was unpleasant, not fun. It got better when I got into high school. I got involved in drama club and in the band and other things. Found places I fit in better that were not really a thing when I was younger. Or any interest in them was not socially accepted at the time, because this was the mid and late 90s, and that was its own special time.
Yeah.
And then about in high school, things got better in high school because of, one, I found things that interested me, places I fit in better, and two, people just grew out of being jerks. a lot of the
That's
people
good.
who bullied me and picked on me when I was a little kid and in junior high just didn't really care anymore. They were too old for that kind of nonsense and had things that they had better things to put their attention on.
Yeah, sorry to dredge up painful memories.
It's fine.
Yeah, I honestly think that might be a big part of why school settings are so prevalent with fiction aimed at younger audiences. It's something familiar. Even if it's unpleasantly familiar, you can still figure out at a glance where people stand. Very often, kids are going to be in Harry's position of being the outsider, and you might know Harry does quickly end up making friends with a couple of other people who might not be as regarded as popular. Ron's poor, which in many schools tends to be a source of ostracization. He gets along pretty well with Neville, who poor Neville. Neville is just a mess in most regards, and it takes
Yep.
him a few books to really find his niche and come into his own, which happens with a lot of people. I would not be surprised if a lot of people were able to identify better with Neville than with Harry, just because, well, not to put too fine a point on it, Harry basically got the lottery in this changeling fantasy, and we'll find out later Neville really got dealt the bad hand.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit harder to identify with somebody who got Harry's situation of fairly well-off parents set him up pretty well, and he's immediately accepted and finds himself doing pretty well in all his classes. When Neville, as a counterpoint, we don't know a lot of those family situations until considerably later in the story, and he very, very much struggles with what many of his peers find not to be that difficult. And there are a lot of people I can see identifying with that, especially because Neville does become very, very awesome at the end. So vindication for everybody who's ever felt like that. High five yourself.
Yep.
So yeah, it just becomes very easy for writers to, like, just a quick shorthand. So, first book, we don't get to see the Quidditch team very well, but you can tell immediately what niche in that school is filled by the Chasers and Wood, who we only meet in the context of Quidditch. Friend George we meet in other contexts, but we also know that they are the class clowns that everybody likes. We know Malfoy and his gang fall very easily into the role of the bully, and which doubles duties as teacher's pet for the bully teacher, Snape. Hermione is very much your teacher's pet. Ron is also a sports fan, even if he's not the most athletic himself, but he's also a little bit of a secret nerd with his chess hobby because, you know, chess is, as mentioned in prior things and to everybody who's ever been in the school, often associated with being just a nerdy hobby. So at Hogwarts, we do get a fair bit of crossover between different, so to speak, cliques, but people still tend to fall into those pretty basic niches. Oh, that didn't go well for you.
No, it didn't. Oh, wow. I cannot hurt this thing.
Try calling it names. Maybe you can hurt it emotionally.
Okay, we will come back to that dungeon later.
Oh, you don't want to get robbed and kill your party again?
No, we'll pass.
That's fair. So, yeah, it's... YA fantasy, like Harry Potter, is specifically targeted to people who will be in the middle and high school bracket, maybe a little bit younger if they're bigger readers. Which, hey, some kids are. I was one of those kids who was reading chapter books at that time.
Yep.
So, you want it to be something that they're going to be familiar with. Like, you're probably not going to do a super in-depth Game of Thronesy political intrigue aimed at 11-year-olds. Having taught young children, like middle school, social studies a little bit, I do not think they would catch all the nuances you'd want to put in. They're not dumb, but they'll want something that's going to kind of ease them into more complex stories first, because there's a lot to take in any given story. You have to keep track of plot, and the more subplots you put in, which Harry Potter does have quite a few subplots. The main plot, obviously, of get through the school year, discover you're a wizard, find the Philosopher's Stone, get there before Voldemort does, as he later discovers that's who he's racing against, learn to play Quidditch, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot to keep track of, and most of it ends up becoming relevant again by the end of the story. So if you're not keeping track of details and who's who and who's done what and who said what, you might not be able to enjoy the story as fully as the author wants you to. And if you're aiming for a specific age group, you don't want to make your readers feel like that. You want to be able to trust your readers, but you also want to be able to give them the help they need. So, and sometimes that's going to be as simple as, here's a familiar setting, so all of the characters can fall into a familiar habit for you, and you can focus on other things. It's just a really good setup, especially if you're doing a coming-of-age story like the Harry Potter franchise itself ended up being for Harry. We follow him from the age of 11 to when he's 17.
Right.
Which, coincidentally, is also your target audience.
Yep. Give or take a year.
More or less. But, you know, mid to late teen is kind of what you're aiming for here, because the books were, as mentioned before, designed to grow up with their target readership. So, school narratives are a really, really good influence for that. And Harry Potter's success really drilled that home for people, and this type of story became a lot more popular. I remember seeing a lot more like magic-based stuff popping up places after Harry Potter got big. Like, not just with the books, but once the movies ended up destroying the box office.
Yep. To be fair, which there would be several other such books in the next few years that would do similar. There was Lord of the Rings was a little after that, wasn't it?
I would have to double check the dates because I was not that big into Lord of the Rings like I was Harry Potter.
It was in that same general area, and then after that was Twilight and Hunger Games.
Yeah, which fell into the supernatural aiming at the young adult bracket, but not quite in the same sense as a magic school. Neither of those really had that. I'm trying to think of the next book series that kind of fit that, and I kind of think it's the Rick Riordan Camp Half-Blood stuff. It wasn't a school, but it was definitely a place to go and learn about all of the mythological stuff that is now going to be a part of your life. At least that's the next one I remember being a big success, because there are still kids around the school I work at who are still actively reading Rick Riordan books, which, hey, more power to you, man. That's awesome.
Yep.
So it's like, that's kind of how I'm measuring this in terms of like stories that follow this pattern that kind of lead to something similar happening. And there are a lot of other stories that contain schools that have some magic, but I'm not sure I could trace them as much to Harry Potter.
Right.
One that comes to mind for me that I believe was a little bit before Harry Potter was Sabriel, because it is mentioned at least a little bit that at Waverly College, where Sabriel attends, you have the option to learn a little bit of charter magic. So it's a school where you can go to learn magic, but it's not a super common thing, and not everyone is required at that school to do it. It's just a facet of the setting to kind of let you know early as a reader that it exists.
Right. And that magic is a normal part of the world, at least to some degree.
Yep. Which, another very good series and a novel that we should probably talk about someday.
Yep. Definitely.
So, in terms of more modern magic school things, honestly, the first one that keeps coming to mind is Owl House, which we really need to get back to watching at some point.
Along with several other things. We have a long list of things we need to catch up on, or watch, or read. It's a thing.
But it's comfortable under this rock. So, what else do you have to add about magic schools or just school narratives in general?
I kind of feel like my one complaint with the school narrative and a lot of things is you get one or two things that are the focus of whatever everyone's looking for. Wow, all the way over there. like, for Harry Potter, it's Quidditch. Everyone loves Quidditch. Everyone is into Quidditch. There's not, like, a lot... Pardon me.
I don't know, there's a lot to keep track of with Quidditch, and yeah.
I more meant, like... So, in your average school, there's going to be a bunch of different extracurricular activities that everyone can participate in. There's going to be sports, there's going to be the band, there's going to be arts and crafts, there's going to be shop class, there's going to be home economics, there's going to be various like drama clubs, there's going to be various groups focusing on this or that specific academia.
Someone went to a bigger school than I did. So I'm remembering my elementary school. I went to a small Catholic school. You basically didn't get extracurriculars if you weren't an athlete because it was such a small school. The only exception I can think of was choir, which is basically part of music class, or speech team, which you couldn't do until you were in like 6th grade. So everything else was basically you play a sport or you find somewhere else to go have your hobby.
Well, in my defense, I'm not speaking from experience, I'm speaking from social osmosis. This is not the experience I had in school. My school was basically, you had the band, you had football in the fall and baseball in the spring, or volleyball and softball for the girls. And then you had drama in high school and maybe one or two other small clubs.
Yeah, I'm kind of speaking from perspective here of like, if the math we've worked out in prior episodes is accurate, my school was actually slightly bigger than Hogwarts because we had about 50 to 60 kids in a grade per year with kindergarten through 8th grade as opposed to the 40 for 7 years that they have in Hogwarts. So, fairly close-ish in size. So I can honestly see how they wouldn't have had that much, but then again, like as soon as I got to public school, there were a lot more options, and thank you, not an athlete. I will say this is actually very true to my experience in schools, though, is that, you know how we've mentioned that McGonagall is the archetypal strict teacher who doesn't play favorites?
Yeah.
Except when it comes to Quidditch, we are absolutely going to bend the rules about sports so my team can win because sports are clearly the most important thing. We are going to take an exception, and because I want sports. Some things never change.
Yep. That's how it is at every school I've ever gone to. And almost every school I've ever seen in pop culture.
Well, you can't brag verisimilitude too much, I suppose. Yay.
Alright, well, it looks like we're supposed to take off now. And I think we've kind of run our course on this particular discussion.
Probably. I mean, I can rant endlessly on the same things over and over again, but we don't really need to hear that. So I'm fine calling it here, and we will see you again later.
Have a good night, folks.